Today we are going to go through these apple breeding trial rows again. I think we were here about 3 weeks ago tasting new apples, and we're gonna, see what we can find, see if we can find something new and magical that's ripe that wasn't ripe 3 weeks ago, and retaste some stuff we've tasted in the past for note-taking purposes. I started in 2011, really. The first seeds I planted were in 2010, but the first cross-pollinations and actual breeding started in 2011. So we're 10 years into this project. Let's see what we can find. We're going to start out here with black strawberry. Looking good this year. Some nice big, very dark-skinned apples here. Just going to give this branch a little shake, see what comes off. Oh, maybe it was a little hard. Okay, so I've labeled all these. This one's crossed with Cherub. This one's crossed with Pink Parfait, which has a slight, very mild, but very slight strawberry flavor to Pink Parfait. So I'm hoping crossing it with black strawberry will encourage a higher quality red-fleshed apple. I mean, this is the most intriguing, important seeming cross to make with black strawberry is Pink Parfait, and I've made it a lot in both directions. So hopefully someday someone will get to grow those seeds out and find something good. Wow, seriously. Off the charts flavor. So yeah, wild, amazing, rich, deep flavor. It's pretty complex, but it definitely leans more towards strawberry than any other apple I've ever tasted. Okay, so when I started this breeding program, every single apple that I crossed had Grenadine as one parent, and most of them, Grenadine was the seed parent. In this case, King David may have been the seed parent. But one of my early goals was simply to make a strongly flavored red-fleshed apple like Grenadine that is better than Grenadine, and this, I think we've done it here. This has better texture and flavor than the average Grenadine by the time Grenadine's ripe enough. It's an earlier apple than Grenadine. It's just better, more interesting. Now, that's not a very high bar to challenge, because Grenadine's a pretty primitive, rough apple. But, this is better, though it does have some of the same traits. So it has a thick, very tannic skin. So the skin is just really thick and chewy, and there's a lot of tannin in it. So this is a fairly high tannin apple. I mean, there's not that many people who are not going to eat this apple just because the flavor is so amazing. And it's not like really harsh. It's not like a really bad cider apple or something, but it's on the tannic side. Also grown under higher irrigation conditions and different climate than this, it probably is going to be quite a bit less tannic, although it might be less sweet and less flavorful too. We'll see. But I would say that at this point, this is perfectly edible. We're into the season of this apple, but I think it'll extend another week or two. I mean, we'll have to see about that. Again, it's not the perfect dessert apple that I'm trying to breed, but it's a damn good stepping stone in that direction. And I will never use Grenadine as a parent again. I got the genes I wanted out of it, got them into a little bit better apple, and then we take that forward, get a little bit better apple than that probably, and take that forward. That's how this game works. I also think that this has high potential as a cider apple. It isn't particularly sharp. It's not like, dead sweet or anything either. So you'd probably use it as a blender. But if you could really grind this skin up and get a lot of that tannin and flavor out of the skin, and if that flavor, this amazing rich flavor, persists through the fermentation process and resides in that finished cider, that could be really, really amazing. I should have more scions of this year than I did last year, fortunately, and we're going to maximize that and get as many of these out into the world as possible so you guys can grow it and taste it. All right, let's see what else we have. This apple, look at this. Amazing, huge apples. When this tree is thinned, there's only 3 apples on it this year. Apparently, it has the potential to be enormous, which is good because my primary thought for this apple is that it's going to be a good cooking apple. It has been usually, I think, pretty reliable producer. I think it's produced fruit most years. It's not, maybe not abundantly, but yeah, look at these monsters here. Very beautiful. Now this is probably a Lady Williams Grenadine cross. Grenadine is certainly going to be one of the parents, but I have to guess at the other parent because the label was lost. It could also be, yeah, that's my best guess. So in the past, this apple has been a pretty good flavor, which it would get from Lady Williams. I don't think it has any red flesh, but on the tart side, like it's been pretty tart and pretty late. I'm going to pick one because this year everything seems to be early, but I have a feeling it'll be fairly tart. So I'm thinking primarily of this as a cooking apple. I mean, this is a beautiful apple. If it's got the tartness that we want and it has a lot of flavor, and I think it's going to have a long hanging season. So in other words, you'll be able to pick this off the tree for weeks, maybe even a month, maybe even more, and use it in cooking right off the tree, which would be pretty neat. You know, this actually seems kind of ripe and it smells pretty ripe, but I've harvested it much later than this, I think in December even. This is quite tart. I have a feeling that it may sweeten up a little if we let it hang and also develop a little bit more flavor, so we'll see about that. But yeah, right now it'd definitely be at least a good blender for cooking. High potential for applesauce because it is nice and sharp, and it's interesting, especially, you know, with this size and how handsome it is. We'll keep an eye on that for the next 3 weeks or even 4 weeks. Laxton, which I'm wondering if I picked the wrong name for that because it's much pinker this year. One of the competing names was Pink Lemonade. I just didn't think it'd have enough pink flesh to support that name, but it seems to this year, so let's try that. I think this may have been better over the last couple of weeks, which I have been eating a few, and they were pretty good. It's starting to get a little bit grainy, you know, moving toward like a softer, mealier flesh, but it's still pretty good. Right now, it's just more like big grains. It doesn't have a lot of pink flavor, but it has some, and I probably would taste a lot more of it if I hadn't just eaten that black strawberry apple. A fair measure of sharpness, a pretty good balance of sharp and sweet. Let's try a different one here. Yeah, this one's very similar, but even more overripe. Yeah, I'd say similar to last year. The apples didn't grow as nice this year. I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that I stood this tree up because it looked like that. Hopefully the scab resistance will hold up, but we're not going to know that for a few years. Yeah, otherwise it's kind of similar to last year. I mean, it's not like a sensational apple. I'm really stoked that it developed that pink flesh. I'm going to pick all of these because they're not going to improve on the tree. I can tell that right now. And I think really, yeah, eating them about between a week ago and 2 weeks ago, which I was eating them, they're much more firm with a fine-grained flesh and pretty nice to eat. Okay, I'm not sure what the parent of this one is. Mushy. I have to throw those in the juice press today. This apple has never shown any promise in the past. Here's another tree that kind of fell over here, but does have an apple on it. Let's smell that. Better leave that for a couple of weeks, or a week at least. Here's a Grenadine Goldbrush cross, 11.9. Hard. Reminds me of Grenadine in lots of bad ways. It's not ripe though. Here's a Grenadine Goldbrush 11.8, and this apple has seemed a little promising at times. Let's try this damaged one here. You can see it very much resembles Grenadine. That's exactly what Grenadine looks like. When it's ripe, that pink is the pink flesh showing through the translucent skin. Thick tannic skin. Thank you, Grenadine, for that trait. Doesn't seem ripe yet. It's still a little bit starchy. I'm going to guess like another 2 weeks and this is going to be better. There's a lot of apples on the tree, so I'll get to eat a bunch this year. I already have a nickname for this apple because it has some interesting characteristics, which I'm not going to tell you what they are right now. But there's enough of them here that I'm going to get a good idea what this apple's about this year. I'd say it's like kind of promising, but you know, don't get too excited. This one's Grenadine Goldbrush 11.4. We tasted this in the last video and it wasn't that promising. Well, mealy. This one's Grenadine Goldbrush 11.6. Does not look ripe yet. Again, with the thick tannic skin from Grenadine. Again, with the speckles and the pink flesh showing through from Grenadine. Flesh texture's not bad. It's big and grainy, but it's still kind of crisp. And keep an eye on that. I think this is Grenadine Goldbrush 11.7, but the tag's a little hard to read. Fairly sharp, very puckery, very tannic. Could be a bitter sharp. Not really bitter, but it's pretty bitter. There's a lot of apples here that could easily be thrown into a cider mix and fit in perfectly well. Okay, here we go. This is interesting. Grenadine Goldbrush 11.2. The nickname for this is Dutch Master because I just like the look of the fruit. I think it's a really pretty fruit. Often it'll have a lot of like splashy russet up here. I'm sure we can find one like that. They seem to be pretty small this year. They're usually a smallish apple, but bigger than this, maybe more around like this size right here. They remind me of like an old oil painting because of all this like layering of color and texture and stuff. So that's why I called it Dutch Master. Yeah, I like this apple. A little bit tart for people who like tart apples. Fine grained flesh, nice texture, pretty crunchy. When it's not ripe, it borders on hard. Not a lot of like wow flavor, but it's fun. It's nice to eat. I think it could ripen up a little bit more. Arrived at Big Red, nicknamed Big Red. As you can see, it's a good size apple. There's some nice specimens here. Okay, this apple has seemed promising, but it always just seems to fall a little bit short. I've just been hoping it'll improve. That one was over the hill. So was this one. I hate that when you get a really nice looking apple, got the pink flesh, and it just doesn't measure up. So all three of these are the same. They're over the hill. They're getting mealy, and the flavor is not exceptional either. So, it's just a little disappointing. I could maybe see using this in breeding for the size, the pink flesh, the looks. I mean, maybe there's potential there. But basically, it's time to pick all of these and use them in a pie, or maybe try to make sauce out of them. And maybe they'll make a good sauce. But the flavor isn't very high. And of course, we're not just after the pink flesh, we're after the pink flavor. So once we get apples that have the pink flesh and a whole lot of flavor that are also good for making sauce, we're going to end up making some pretty amazing tasting sauce, I have a feeling. But I don't think this is the apple. Okay, Ice Princess has had a lot of early drops this year. There's only a few apples left on the tree here. I really like this apple. It's very intriguing. It's got a really mild but intriguing flavor, like a real clean, crisp flavor. I think we'll pick this one here. So the other thing that really intrigued me about this apple early on was the extreme crispness, just like over-the-top crispness, and it has not been as crisp this year. This one is actually better than anything I've tasted this year. Maybe they're crisping back up as the cold weather sets in. Another thing was I picked these off the tree in the winter time, and they were still crisp and still really good, so I was hoping it was going to be a super late hanging apple. This year it had a lot of early drops, and the texture just wasn't as crisp even early on. They seem ripe earlier, so this is just going to need more assessment to figure that out. Now, it does seem like this year everything's ripening a little early, so it's hard to say. We're just going to have to grow this more, get another tree established, which I've done, and see what it does. But this is showing pretty good crispness now, for sure, so that's promising. I have a feeling it's going to have a problem with early drops, but the early drops were good. They were ripe and they were good, and I ate them or used them in cooking and stuff. So I turned the camera off and I started eating this apple again right away. And I want to finish this apple. So in spite of the very mild flavor, it's like a very clear, mild flavor with a lot of high notes and no base. It's just intriguing somehow. And this one doesn't have very much of that pine flavor that it has had in the past, and some of them have this year. But for some reason, out of all the apples I've eaten so far and tasted, this is the one I want to finish the most. Because when you first taste it, it doesn't seem that interesting. I was feeding it to a friend the other day, and she said exactly that. She's like, yeah, when I first bit it, I wasn't that interested, but then as I ate it, I was more interested. Don't know what that's about, but I'm intrigued by this apple, looking forward to keeping growing it, and I have a feeling it's going to stick around, and be worth propagating. Appaloosa finally produced a few apples this year. It looks like they're going to be very late. And it is a Lady Williams cross, so that would make sense. But at least I'll get to taste that again. I tasted it. This is one of the first apples that fruited for me, and then voles almost killed this tree, and it's grown back very, very slow. It's been years since I tasted it. We're into the Lady Williams crosses now, and they're all very late. Most of them are very late. So if you've heard that, you know, when you grow apples from seed, they're going to be completely different from the parents every time, that's simply not true. They usually show a lot of traits in common with the parents. It's just not reliable, and they do throw very different traits at the same time, and sometimes just really weird different apples. So this one that's way out on the end has always been very productive. It's a very nice apple. It's quite tart. It's good for cooking though. And last year, when it was riper than this, it's not quite there yet, I took a few of them and made sauce, and the sauce was very good. Sugar added, but yeah, it made a really nice sauce. So this probably has a lot of potential for cooking apple. Again, it's been very productive. It's very nice looking. It's pretty good size. Here we're into the 2013 crosses. This one is Rubinat Rubiat 13.3. Looks overripe. Yeah. Overripe. I don't think that was very good last time anyway. This one doesn't have a tag, but it's going to be the Rubinat Rubiat or Rubiat Rubinat. It's crisp. It's pretty tart. Not a ton of flavor. Maybe under better conditions. Seems like it sunburns pretty easy. I think it probably is ripe though. Oh. Now if we could grow specimens like this, it's starting to look more interesting. This has got a great texture. It's very crisp, fine-grained, juicy. Flavor's not bad. It doesn't seem to have a lot of, red, pink flavor. It does have a pretty thick, pretty tannic skin, but if you didn't mind a little tannin, I would say this is worth eating. That's pretty nice. So whatever this skinny little straight, almost no side branches really, crosses, again, it's going to be Rubinat Rubiat or Rubiat Rubinat, one of the two. It's intriguing. Worth keeping an eye on that one. I would eat that apple. Okay, now we're into what I call the not Laxton's Epicure crosses. These are a cross between an apple that is labeled Laxton's Epicure, but I think it's not, but I'm going to go look again and make sure. And it looks just like this. It looks like this. It has a very red skin with a red stem. I used it originally because it had some like nice fruit candy flavors, maybe like, watermelon candy. This year it just tastes like everything I don't like about a red apple. That's mealy and unremarkable. Same there. Same there. A little bit of pink flesh. Looks like we missed that one by a couple of weeks. Okay, now this is the same cross, but it's a different tree, and it looks more promising. Yeah, this is a nice looking apple. It has much less cracking. It seems like it's pretty ripe right now. This isn't really great or anything, but it's worth keeping an eye on. Let's take a look at the tag, make sure we know what it is. Not Laxton's Grenadine 12.3. Okay, this does not look good. And it's not good. Cherry Cox Rubiat 13.9. This looks interesting. Let's try that one. Does that taste like burnt rubber? Give that a little more ripening time. Not impressed. All right, here's a cracked yellow apple with waxy skin. That's a bad sign. Yeah, forget that. Cherry Cox Rubiat 13.5 looks like a loser. Okay, this is the apple that tasted like dust a few weeks ago. And I've eaten a couple more of them, and they did have that same characteristic. Sweet 16 Rubiat. This got all the negative characteristics of Sweet 16. The texture goes down and gets mealy. Kind of like an unpleasant red apple flavor, at least to me. I don't think that one's going to end up being a keeper. Sweet 16 Rubiat 13.5. Overripe. Overripe. We pick all those today for cider. I'm pressing cider in about an hour. So this is dropping apples right now. I kind of like the flavor. So everything's falling off this tree. Sweet 16, Rubaiyat 13-1. Strange flesh. It's kind of hard, very fine grain. So this is kind of interesting, but very weird. It actually has quite a bit of flavor. I could see this being a good juice apple, and maybe a cider apple, because it does have quite a bit of flavor and pretty interesting, but otherwise not that great. You know, now this year that I finally have a bunch of these Sweet 16 crosses fruiting, I have to say they're pretty disappointing. You know, they don't seem to be throwing a lot of really interesting apples. That's worth noting. Hopefully that's not a strong trend because I just made a ton of Sweet 16 crosses. Okay, here's Cherub. It should be pretty overripe now. I've been eating a lot of these. The riper they get, the more they have a caramel or burnt sugar taste. Pretty wild. Yeah, it tastes like caramel. Super weird. I definitely want to pick all of the rest of these. This apple has so many weird flavors. This year, sometimes it tasted like rose, burnt sugar, or caramel. The more it ripens, the more it goes from burnt sugar. I know burnt sugar is caramel. I can't explain it. It's just one is edgy and one is more rounded. It'll have the berry flavors. It'll have like the Wixon savory thing going on. It's just odd. There's like a lot of competing strange flavors sometimes in this apple. It's an odd bird. But imagine the potential also in breeding with all those different weird flavors. Look how juicy it is. It's just dripping juice. I can't even explain the flesh texture. It's almost like a firm plum. It's getting watery and gosh, yeah, I mean, it's almost more like a stone fruit in a way, but real firm. I don't know. It's such a strange apple. I got a lot of seeds for this saved this year. So grow some of them out and see what kind of weird apples come out of that. So in the last video, I stopped at this tree and I had two little flat apples on it. It's a Wixon cross. Wixon Rubaiyat 13-4. They cracked, and so I picked them and ate them. They were actually pretty tart, which I wasn't expecting. Not as promising as I had hoped, but we'll see what it does in the future. Got a couple of maypole crosses here. So this is a Wixon maypole cross. Looks pretty bad, very small, very stunted, very cracked, like Wixon. Wixon always cracks in the rain. Not very interesting flavor, not very promising. Well, I have higher hopes for this one here. You can see apples are decent size. I don't look too horrible condition. Very, very sweet. Fairly tannic, not much in the way of flavor. I would keep an eye on this one. Kind of a strangely soft flesh, almost like that cherub flesh. Now here's another maypole Wixon cross, but this one didn't inherit the column trait. It looks kind of dwarfish, but you can see it's not like this, you know, straight up and down kind of things. Here's another one that grew more like a regular tree. I mean, the comparison between these two is pretty obviously different. So let's see what these are like. Overripe, sweet, low on flavor, not very interesting. Maple Wixon 15-8. All right, this one's Maple Pink Parfait. Looks like some small, primitive looking apples. Just from the looks of them and the looks of this tree with the big checkers and the bark, it just looks like a primitive apple, so I'm not expecting much out of this. Very red, not very sweet, very tannic. Not much to recommend that. This is a tree from the last video that had really bad water core and like a watermelon candy flavor. I'm very intrigued by this apple. I think it's a very promising apple. In all likelihood, it's going to end up being a keeper. Rubaiyat Pink Parfait 15-6. But it's going to have to outgrow that water core to get a good idea of what it's really like. So the water core is a physiological disorder. And usually when trees become more mature, they get a bigger root system. If they're more well cared for, if there's more of like a balance of nutrients, I think it has something to do with an imbalance of calcium or something. I can't really remember. I haven't researched it that much, but most trees will outgrow it pretty much over time. Once they outgrow it, they might have it every once in a while or in a few apples, but it won't be too much of an issue. Now, some people like water core, and that's okay, but the apples don't keep well. Not something I really want to try for. Okay, we're almost at the end. Grenadine Chestnut 15-2.
2. I think we tasted this last year, and I don't think it was good. Oof. Very, very tannic, drying to the mouth. The flesh is kind of fibrous. Yeah, there's a good measure of tannin and bitterness in this apple. For all the pink flesh, the flavor isn't really strong. I mean, it's nothing like, you know, black strawberry when the flesh is this pink. Is really, really flavorful, and this is not. I don't know. It has a weird bad flavor to it. I think this is the one that might have tasted like dishwater last year. I don't know if it tastes like dishwater, but it's a little unpleasant. Probably a loser. Rubaiyat Maple 15-2. This has not been promising the 2 years it's fruited. And it's still not. This is the last one. This is an unlabeled, but obviously a maypole cross. It's got the columnar trait, red fleshed apples. Tart, low sugar, low flavor, very tart. Oh, very primitive, very useless. Too bad. It's got a great form. All right, that's it for today. I'm trying to think of what stood out in there. Not a lot of promising stuff, not a lot of promising new stuff. You know, when I think back, what was fun to eat? Ice Princess, Dutch Master was okay. Flaxen, black strawberry. You know, black strawberry's a star. You know, that's in spite of, my mouth is all dried out. It's hard to talk. It's like having, you know, goosebumps all in the side of your mouth. It's like, I feel like a dog eating peanut butter. Yeah, and you know, black strawberry is a star in spite of all of its flaws because that flavor is just really incredible. And that, of course, is why I'm trying to breed with it a lot to move that flavor forward into other things. So there'll probably be like one more day out here, maybe two, depending, mostly to taste the Lady Williams crosses as they ripen. I've pick some of that stuff as late as January. Still hoping those last few Ice Princess will hang on the tree and improve in quality and maybe get crisper if that's possible as the winter progresses. So here we are at the end of I think it's the 7th, so the end of the first week of November. There's still a lot of, the majority of these 2 rows here have never fruited, and there's still quite a few things in this that haven't fruited from the 2013s. And still a fair, you know, good handful from even the 2011s that haven't fruited yet. So we still have more stuff to try in the future. Over and out.